Hello, welcome to Ken Tamplin Vocal Academy. I'm Ken Tamplin, and we're about to embark on a journey of 25 of the greatest vocal intros of all time. Now, we did a 25 most epic vocal intros, which is more anthemic, etc., and we got so many requests. Ken, can you please do one that are more like single line and the most memorable? So we chose to do that. Now, this was done by polling, and what I mean by that is done by requests, where you guys gave us requests of songs. It was put all on an Excel spreadsheet, and the highest ranking ones made the songs go towards number one. So with that said, we're going to start at number 25. We're going to work our way towards number one, and don't go away, because at the end of this video we're going to put a bunch of honorable mentions for the ones that didn't make the top 25. Okay, with that said, let's get started with Jimi Hendrix coming in at 25. Now, the song is called Purple Haze, and what's interesting about the song is it was originally called Purple Haze Jesus Saves, and the reason is that Jimmy had some really bizarre dream of him walking underwater, and apparently it was pretty traumatic, and he called out to Jesus, and Jesus saved him from suffocating in the water. So I thought that was interesting. Also, when this song was sent to remastering from Reprise to Track, or from Track to Reprise Records, I forget which it was, but there was a big stamp that said on the outside, distortion intended, please do not correct. So with that said, let's check out Jimi Hendrix, Purple Haze, Jesus Saves.
Purple haze all in my brain. Many things just don't seem the same. Acting funny, I don't know why. Excuse me while I kiss this guy.
Okay, sliding in at number 24 is Creedence Clearwater Revival, and the lead vocalist is John Fogerty. Now, John's an interesting character because he wrote all the songs, produced all the songs, performed the songs, arranged the songs, played guitar on the songs. I mean, the guy was a one-man band. And that fascinates me only because if you look at song credits today, you see it was recorded in 3 different studios. It was mixed by a couple different guys, or engineered and mixed by another guy, and has all these producers and whatever. And in John's case, I mean, he wrote songs that actually influenced decades of rock and roll, all by himself in his basement pretty much. So with that said, let's check out Have You Ever Seen the Rain?
Someone told me long ago there's a calm before a storm. I know it's been coming for some time.
Cool. Sliding its way into the number 23 slot is Metallica's Enter Sandman. Now, guitarist and songwriter Kirk Hammett told Rolling Stone magazine that he was green with jealousy over Soundgarden's Louder Than Love and wanted to write a lick just like it. So he stayed up till about 2 o'clock in the morning, and he came up with the riff to Enter Sandman. Now, he also wrote the song about SIDS, which is Sudden Infant Death Syndrome, or Cribs death, so to speak. And when the producer Rob Rock heard that, he said, I don't think so, that's pretty gruesome. Let's make it a little more light. So they sort of changed it to be kind of about the boogeyman. So with that said, check it out. Awesome. Sneaking its way to the number 22 slot is Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. Now, the song was originally written by Obie Benson, one of the members of the Four Tops. And the Four Tops were rolling into Berkeley, California in May of 1969 and witnessed Bloody Thursday, which was the brutal beating of cops beating up anti-war protesters. Now, he genuinely was just asking all the kids, hey, what's going on? What's happening here? And that led to the lyric and the inspiration of the song. Now, he brought it back to his band, the Four Tops, and he says, no, man, we're not going to do an anti-war song, a protest song. We're just not going to do it. And he says, it's not a protest song. It's a love song. I genuinely want to know what's going on, what I can do, what my contribution could be. So he brought it to Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye loved it, and they worked on the song together, and here you have What's Going On. So what is going on?
Mother, mother, there's too many of you crying. Brother, 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 there's far too many of you dying.
Okay, dominating the number 21 slot is Boston, More Than a Feeling. Now, this is a pretty interesting story because it's the story of Tom Scholz and Brad Delp. Now, Tom didn't even pick up learning the guitar until he was like 21 years old. I think it was his junior year at MIT, which is a really technical school. And so he's a tech head, you know, made all of his own gear, his amps, mixing consoles, etc., and recorded the Boston stuff down in the basement of his house. I kid you not. They were turned down by every major label, as the story goes, over and over again, right? We always hear the same story. Finally, I think he was around 29 and they were going to just give up. Him and Brad, it's time to become responsible. He gets married and he would go back and maybe do like a little tour here and there and go back to work at Kodak, which is where his main staple for his bread and butter was. Finally, he got a label interested in More Than a Feeling, and they put the song out and it did pretty well. So they gave him an opening slot for Black Sabbath, and I guess it went pretty well for them. So one thing led to another. They did a couple of arena tours, smaller, and then he went back to work at Kodak again, and he was just kind of going, wow, do I become a technician for the rest of my life, or do I do Boston? I guess as the album took off even more, it was pretty obvious it was time to quit Kodak and do Boston. So with that said, that's More Than a Feeling for me. Let's check it out.
I looked out this morning and the sun was gone. Turned on some music to start my day. Then lost myself in a familiar song. I closed my eyes and I slipped away.
Rocking its way into the number 20 slot is Joan Jett with I Love Rock and Roll. Now, Joan's an interesting character because she joined the band The Runaways, and I love what Songfacts says about it. It says her first serious band was at age 15 with The Runaways. How much more serious can you get at 15? I think you're practically a runaway as it is. Nonetheless, she went on to do Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, and we have I Love Rock and Roll. Let's rock out to this now.
Must have been about 17. But the news going strong. Played my favorite song.
Muscling its way into the number 19 slot is Bob Seger and Old Time Rock and Roll. Now, this old Muscle Shoals piece was actually just a demo where Bob was hanging out around the studio, heard the demo and said, well, I really like that. I'd like to try to cut that myself. Well, he tried to do it and could not get the magic of the original demo, so he wound up using the original demo on his recording. Now, funny thing is Bob goes on to be quoted as saying he actually helped participate in some of the songwriting, particularly the lyrics, but he was feeling a little generous that day and wound up not taking credit for it. Said it was the worst musical decision of his life. It went on to be one of the greatest hits of Bob Seger, the song Bob never wrote. But some other interesting facts about the song is that because it was a demo, some young kid, I think his name was Forrest McDonald, had cruised into Muscle Shoals on that day they were making the demo, and his parents drove into the parking lot, waited outside. He walked up, knocked on the door, said, hey, I'm a lead guitar player, can you use any help? And says, yeah, sure, we don't really have anybody, we're cutting these demos, and come on in, we'll give it a shot. So he walked in. That ought to be a lesson to us musicians for tenacity and some brevity, to walk in, played lead guitar on that song particularly, and it went on into the infamy that it's become, Old Time Rock and Roll. So that said, Bob Seger, Old Time Rock and Roll, check it out.
Just take those old records on the shelf. I sit and listen to them by myself. Today's music ain't got the same soul. I like that old time rock and roll.
Okay, manhandling the number 18 slot is Van Morrison, and the song is called Brown Eyed Girl. Actually, the song was originally called Brown Skin Girl, and it was about an interracial relationship. I kid you not. In fact, the song was banned by a lot of stations for the one line called Making Love in the Green Grass. So Van Morrison didn't really like this song. He said, I've got 300 other great songs to choose from. This is one of my least favorite. But as fate would have it, it was the summer of love, and people really gravitated towards the song, which is really interesting. But the background vocals section is the Sweet Inspirations, and they were also the background vocal section for Chain of Fools by Aretha Franklin, Dionne Warwick's Say a Little Prayer, and even for Elvis Presley. So let's check it out, Brown Eyed Girl.
Hey, where did we go? Days when the rains came. playing a new game.
Walking right into the number 17 slot is Roxanne by the Police. Now, as Sting tells it, they drove all the way from Holland to Paris in Andy Summers' Citroën. And they were so short on cash, they had to all put their money together and shack up in a one-room shanty in the middle of a very seedy area in Paris. Apparently, they were going to play with a band called The Damned, but The Damned actually got in an argument with the venue and split and left them holding the bag. In the interim, they were walking around and Sting saw this kind of red light district, and he saw these beautiful little birds walking around, and he imagined himself falling in love with one of them and decided to write a song about it. So here we have it, Roxanne.
Roxanne, you don't have to put on the red light. Those days are over. You don't have to say about it through the night. Roxanne.
Holding it together at number 16 is Al Green and Let's Stay Together. Now, Al actually hated this song because he hated the sound of his voice. He thought it sounded really wimpy and thin and a lot of falsetto. But the producer, Willie Mitchell, got in an argument, I guess the only argument they ever had, convincing him that it was a hit song. And in fact, it was maybe his signature sound that most people kind of recognize and know him for. Shortly thereafter, Mary Woodson White, his former girlfriend, in his home, poured some scalding hot cereal all over him and burnt him badly, I guess, and walked in the other room and then shot herself. Apparently, according to Al, this was a wake-up call for him, and he decided to become a pastor in 1976. With that said, let's stay together.
I'm so in love with you. Whatever you want to do. Oh yeah, all right with me. 'Cause you.
Okay, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need. Coming in at number 15 is the Rolling Stones' Can't Always Get What You Want. Now, John Lennon was quoted as saying that the Rolling Stones were keen on plagiarizing a lot of their innovation, and it was just a matter of months before they caught up to them with something. Sure enough, in true fashion, they sort of modeled Can't Always Get What You Want after Hey Jude, replete with choir and orchestra. So I guess in some sense, Mick did get what he wants. Check it out.
When a soul cuts deep at the reception, a glass of wine and a hand, I knew she was gonna meet her connection. At her feet was a footloose man.
Okay, you really got me on this one. Coming in at number 14 is Dave Davies and the Kinks. You really got me. Now, Dave tells the story that he saw this girl dancing in a club, and he went on to later expound that it was someone he saw in an audience, so I'm not sure which story is accurate, but he said that he saw this girl, and it was just one of those personalities and beauties that was just left him dumbfounded. So he was a girl, you really got me, I don't know what I'm doing, I can't speak, I can't do this, I can't do that. So left him speechless, right? Well, actually, too, another interesting part of the story is about the Kinks, You Really Got Me, is that the tone that he got on his guitar, apparently he got his girlfriend pregnant. Her name was Sue Sheehan, I believe it was, and his parents would not let them get married. And so instead of cutting himself and doing self-harm, he decided to cut up the speakers on his amplifier, which gave him a fuzz tone. So he was one of the initiators of the original distortion. Not the only guy, but certainly one of them. Yeah, so with that said, you really got me.
Girl, you really got me going. You got me so I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, you really got me going. You got me so I guess I been
All right, romancing its way into the number 13 slot is Rod Stewart and Maggie May. Apparently the song is about his very first sexual encounter, and it happened to be with an older woman, Maggie May. At any rate, Rod left school when he was like 15 years old and had a brief stint being a silkscreen printer, and then went on to busking harmonica. I kid you not. I guess major influences for him were Al Jolson, Bill Haley and the Comets, and Little Richard, which is interesting. Early on, I guess his family used to play these records all the time, so that was a heavy influence. But Rod went on to being one of the greatest selling artists of all time. So with that said, Rod Stewart and Maggie May. Check it out.
Wake up, Maggie, I think
Etching its way into the number 12 slot is Candle in the Wind by Elton John. Now, according to songwriter Bernie Taupin, the song isn't just about Marilyn Monroe, it's about how we glamorize death and immortalize people. It could have been James Dean, it could be Elvis. Now, Elton went on to change the lyric of this song for Diana's funeral and called it Goodbye England's Rose for 2.5 billion people as a listening audience. So with that said, Candle in the Wind.
Goodbye, Norma Jean. Though I never knew at all, I had the grace to hold yourself when those around you crawl.
Unwaveringly coming in at the number 11 slot is Bob Marley and Stir It Up. Now, this is a crazy story. This is back around 1976 when Jamaica was in a huge turmoil between the Socialistic Party and the Conservative Party, and it got pretty violent. In fact, it got so violent that someone snuck into Bob's house with a gun, shot him in the arm, grazed his wife's head with a bullet, and shot his manager in the stomach 3 times. Now, miraculously, they all lived to tell the story, and Bob went on heroically to do the performance in order to be able to hope with the hopes towards uniting Jamaica. So with that said, stir it up.
Stir it up, little darling, stir it up.
Beating out the number 10 slot is Michael Jackson's Beat It. Now, another interesting story behind this is producer Quincy Jones wanted Michael to write a song like My Sharona. Remember that song, My Sharona, da-da-da-da-da, right? So you can hear kind of the influence in that, which is pretty interesting. The backup band, ironically and strangely, was Toto. So Steve Lukather and the Pecoro brothers. So that was interesting. And the guitar solo was none other than Eddie Van Halen. So an interesting mix of a lot of different influences. Now, in the video, it got a little creepy because Michael invited the videographer to include the Bloods and the Crips, 2 notorious LA gangs, to participate in the video. So here you have it, Beat It. Showing up at number 9 is Peter Frampton and Show Me the Way. Now, this song was actually released on an album called Peter Frampton prior to Frampton Comes Alive, and this song absolutely tanked. It did nothing. Then all of a sudden it gets released on Frampton Comes Alive and becomes one of the greatest live selling albums of all time. I guess Peter had to show them the way. Check it out. Okay. Is there anybody in there? Comfortably assuming the number 8 slot is Pink Floyd and Comfortably Numb. Now, Roger Waters says it's not a big drug song, though it kind of is if you ask me. But anyway, he claims that it was about when he was a kid and he had this horrific flu, like 105 temperature, and he was completely delirious. Combined with a show that they did at the Spectrum in Philadelphia around 1977, where he had some really bad stomach cramps, and a doctor gave him a shot of something before he went on stage. He said it was so potent it was enough to kill a freaking elephant. And so he just sat there comfortably numb, just barely trying to make it through the parts. Well, apparently there was a big encore scheduled he couldn't even make it out to because he was so knocked out by this drug. Hence he wrote the song Comfortably Numb. Check it out.
Is there anybody in there? Just not if you can hear me. Is there anyone at home?
Taking a chunk out of the number 7 slot is Heart and Barracuda. Now, Heart was originally named White Heart and later shortened to Heart, but the song Barracuda was actually about a record company that floated around that Ann and Nancy were in an incestual relationship together, which really upset Ann. She found it detestable, and it was a bummer because fans would come up after shows and say, "Hey, how's your lover?" So she got so pissed off, she wrote a song about it, and here we have it, Barracuda.
So this ain't the end. I saw you again today. I had to turn my heart away. You smile like the sun, kisses forever, and tears it never ends.
Ooh, you make my motor run. Coming in at number 6 is My Sharona and the band The Knack. Now, lead vocalist Doug Fieger wrote the song about an actual girl named Sharona. I think her name was Sharona Alperin or something like that. I guess, she was around 16 at the time. He had a girlfriend, she had a boyfriend, but it took them about a year to get together, and they finally became an item. I guess they kind of parted ways after Doug had some alcohol issues and some rock star issues, but she wanted to be her own Sharona. She didn't want to be his Sharona. Apparently, actually, she sells houses in Southern California and the Los Angeles area. So if you want to buy an uptown home, like a rock star crib, you can get it from Sharona. With that said, My Sharona, take it away. Birthing its way into the number 5 slot is Born in the USA. Now, a lot of people think that this was sort of a national anthem rah-rah song for the United States, but it was anything but that. In fact, Bruce was really disturbed at the fact that a lot of the guys that came back from war were either mentally disturbed or they came back maimed and certainly couldn't find work. In fact, a lot of people were afraid to hire them, and not unlike kind of what's going on in today's climate for a lot of our veterans now. So with that said, Born in the USA. Okay, walking right into the number 4 slot is Aerosmith and Walk This Way. Now, the song was recorded back in 1975 when Joe Perry came up with this lick, but they could not come up with a lyric to save their life. In fact, 4 days went by and there was no lyrics forthcoming. The band was about to scrap the song, and leaving Steve Perry back at the studio, they went off to see the movie Young Frankenstein. Now, Igor in the movie, which is Marty Feldman, says to Young Frankenstein, "Walk this way." Very famous scene in the movie, and the band laughed so much about it they said, "That's it, walk this way." So they went back to inform Steven Tyler, we have the name of the song, and so they scratched out the rest of the lyric. Now, the band sort of kind of went off into obscurity with a lot of drug problems and a lot of issues and whatnot, when a very famous producer named Rick Rubin decided to unite the band with Run DMC. The band's career was pretty much over at this time, and I think all the members in the band were in rehab, no kidding. But they wound up doing a synergy with Run DMC. Run DMC didn't want to do it. They said, we don't want to have some white trash, trailer trash lyric on our record, right? But they united, did the song. The chemistry was awesome, and it reignited Aerosmith's career, and actually, just was a huge explosion for both bands. Run DMC went off to run one direction, and Aerosmith walked another direction. So with that said, walk this way, let's do this. Hitting the number 3 sweet spot is Guns N' Roses' Sweet Child of Mine. Now, Slash is on record and saying he hates the song and that it was basically a string skipping exercise that they turned into Sweet Child of Mine. Now, Axl was quoted as saying that he'd heard the song and wrote it about his girlfriend, Erin Everly, and that used Lynyrd Skynyrd as one of his influences to make the song really heartfelt. So that said, Sweet Child of Mine. It doesn't take much imagination to see what made it to the number 2 slot, and that's John Lennon's Imagine. Now, this song is one of the most influential songs in all of pop and rock history, and maybe one of the most interpreted and misunderstood songs. Let me explain. Now, John was inspired by Yoko Ono's book Grapefruit. It was a collective of poems, etc. And let me read one of the lyrics of one of the poems. She said, "Imagine the clouds dripping, dig a hole in your garden and put them in. religion. So it was imagine this, imagine that, and so forth. But Lennon went on to say that Dick Gregory, who gave Yoko and me a little Christian prayer book, if you can imagine a world at peace with no denomination of religion, my God is bigger than your God kind of thing, then we can imagine this kind of peace. So he wasn't saying that there is no God, or, let's all pretend God doesn't exist, I don't believe in God. He's saying, that God transcends and is bigger than a lot of our arguments about religion and so forth. So I think that's worth noting. Anyway, that said, let's dig into Imagine.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us only sky.
Okay, winning the #1 slot for the most memorable intro vocal line of all time goes to Janis Joplin, Piece of My Heart. Now, Janis is also maybe one of the most influential female rock vocalists of all time. And I want to remind you guys, this was done by popular vote. So whoever voted the highest is how these got to the front of the line here. So now stick around, because I'm going to do a bunch of honorable mentions right after this song. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe to my channel. If you're interested in learning how to sing, I have a singing course called How to Sing Better Than Anyone Else. You can find it right here. And until next time, gang, thank you for joining me. Please like and subscribe to my channel. God bless all of you, and peace out.
Oh, honey, like you, the only man I ever wanted and I ever needed. Oh, honey, didn't I give you nearly everything I ever had to give? I tried to do it. Each time I tell myself that I think I've had enough work. I'm gonna show you, baby, that a woman can return. Won't you take home, take it, take another little piece of my heart now. Come on.
When the God of the Vita, honey, don't you know that I love you? Oh, I feel good. I knew that I would not. I feel good. I knew that I would not. Love hurts. Love scars. Love wounds. And bars any heart. Put up pumpkins. Bring your friends. It's fun to lose and to pretend. She's overboard. Self-assured. Now I know a dirty word. What I like about you, you hold me tight. Tell me I'm the only one. Wanna come over tonight? Yeah. Well, since my baby left me, well, I found a new place to dwell. But it's down at the end of Lonely Street, that Heartbreak Hotel. You are so beautiful. To me. Every superstition writings on the wall. Every superstition let us about to fall. I'm here in the fields. I fought for my meals. I get my back into my living.
fire. I fell into a ring of fire.
Saturday in the park, think it was the 4th of July. Saturday in the park, think it was the 4th of July.
This is your celebration.
Celebrate good times, come on. Celebrate good times, come on.
And let's celebrate.
Got a black magic woman. Got a black magic woman. I've got a black magic woman. Got me so blind I can't see. That she's a black magic woman. She's trying to make a devil out of me. Oh, mama, I'm in fear for my life on the long. I'm alone. Lawman has put an end to my running. Oh, mama, I can hear you were crying. You're so scared and all alone. Hangman is coming down from the gallows, and I don't have very long.
Hey guys, if you like what you heard, please like and subscribe to my channel by clicking on the subscribe button. That will actually take you to another page where you want to click on the bell icon, and it opens up a menu, and the menu has notifications on it where there's a little box you can check where it says send me all notifications for this channel. Check the box and then click the save button and you'll get notifications from me every time I have a cool video come out. Okay? Thanks guys. Peace out.